All right, all right. It's 4 o'clock. That's called the February 6th Alameda County Water District Special Board Meeting to order, please. Roll call.
Directors Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Sethi, Weed,
Here.
and Huang.
Here, and let the record reflect that Director Weed is Sethi, sorry, is unavoidably detained and he may join us later. All right, next item is salute to the flag. Director Gunther, would you do the honor?
Certainly. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. All right, do we have housekeeping remarks?
I
Mr.
would be
Stevenson?
happy to just welcome everybody to our special meeting of the ACWD Board. My name is Ed Stevenson and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda, presentation materials, and other materials for the meeting are all available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Toward the end of this meeting, the board will convene privately into closed session. Members of the public may remain online or in the boardroom in order to be informed of board reports once the closed session is concluded. Again, thank you all for attending, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
All right, and next item is public comments on matters on this notice of special board meeting. Do we have any members of the public online? Can you please verify? It's all staff? Okay. So in the room, do we have any members of the public that wish to address the board on items that's on this agenda, today's agenda? Seeing none, let's move on to item 4, Water Resources Planning Workshop, please.
Okay, this is the third in a series of workshops planned for calendar years 2024 and 2025 that will focus on planning for long-term management of the district's water resources in the face of climate change, evolving regulations, declining availability of water supplies, new water supply alternatives, and other factors using an integrated resources planning approach. This workshop series builds on previous workshops conducted in 2022 and 2023. And I think I'll turn it over right now to our Director of Water Resources, Ms. Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. The team is very pleased to be here today for this first workshop of 2025 to discuss our long-term water resources planning. And we have a lot to cover tonight, and we look forward to an engaging discussion. So I'm going to turn it over directly to Thomas Snyder, our Water Supply and Planning Manager, who's going to get us started and introduce the team.
Thank you very much. Good evening. As mentioned, this is the third in our ongoing series of workshops to lead up to our new water resources master plan for members of the community who are, I believe, have attended past meetings or maybe online. Our past sessions are all recorded and available online if you'd like to catch up to where we are. We're not going to do a lot of background into how we got to here today, though. I want to proceed because we do have a lot of great discussion ahead of us. Before the board is the same consulting team that was here with us at the last meeting. In particular, we have the team from Woodard and Kern. I'm going to just name a few extra faces. In addition to Persephone, not St. James, but St. Charles, whom you've met, and Katie Cole, our project manager. We also have a water resource engineer, Max McNally, working on the project team, and also Mr. Chris Hughes, who is an understudy for our project manager, Ms. Cole, who, if you didn't notice, is taking some time off pretty soon. So Chris, you'll be seeing him a lot more at meetings moving forward. In addition, we have our sub-consultant, Philippe Daniel of Liquisti. With that, I would like to hand it off to Philippe to actually share some introductory words.
So the objectives for today's workshop are really to review these supply options and resource strategies
obtain consensus on the list content, and then discuss really what the next step's going to be as this portfolio development process and approach. Our agenda, if you next slide, please, Thomas, is here. And I just want to acknowledge that we live in the real world. It's messy, it's complicated, it's volatile and fluid. And we have the audacity in that kind of world to enter into a water resource plan 25 years out. So our objective today really is to listen to you to better understand your insights, your perspectives, and incorporate it at this particular inflection point of the project. We'll be checking in with you at 2 other key decision nodes later. My role is really going to be trying to understand your insights, not only just the what and the how, but the why, so we can better understand what is underlying that to inform the team as we develop these water resource portfolios. So there's going to be 2 kinds of questions. Number 1 is if there's anything for clarification, we clarify as you go. Just stop and get clarification from the presenter. And then we have 3 discrete points where we're going to have group discussion as kind of noted in your packet. So with that, I'll turn it over to Persephone.
You may have noticed that this slide is not in keeping with the packet that you have. You figured that all out. That's wonderful. So we ended up moving the agenda slide up because we felt like it flowed better after the objectives. So that should be the only change in the PowerPoint presentation that we're offering for you tonight. So hello, everyone. It's great to be back. We've made a lot of progress since we last had our discussion. And as Philippe pointed out, we do have a lot to go through today. You know, there's a lot of content. You also have an associated long list of supply options that came along with the board meeting slides. And so, as you know, there's probably, I think, 42 of those. You know, our intent is not to discuss all 42 at length today, even though we probably could. But I'm guessing you probably don't want to be here for a day or 2 doing that. So we want to try to consolidate that conversation. And as Philippe said, we want to also make sure that we're getting really valuable input from you all today as we move on to our next steps as well through this process. So in keeping with that, there we go, the roadmap. Right? So as we indicated, you know, this began back in the phase 1 times where we got a lot of input on how we were going to do this planning. And we talked a little bit about supply options then through that process as sort of an early guide as to what sort of an effort we were going to be expending for this planning effort. And so we also talked about goals and objectives and got confirmation on those. And we revisited those once we started phase 2 as well. And so we also talked a lot about forecasted demand and baseline supply as we went into having the conversations about the need to meet water use objectives that are sort of a parallel yet integrated process that we're going to be touching on a little bit tonight. And then we've gone through and said, okay, what are the different supply options that we heard from all of you at previous communications? We've had meetings with staff. We've also talked about what different supply related options that they have. And so we're going to be briefly going through what those are. And then next up after that is, you know, because there's 42 of them, we need to get them down to a reasonable number that we can wrap our arms around. And so we're going to be screening some of those down. So we'll talk a little bit about that process. And then we also want to incorporate in what we call water resource strategies. And so we'll be talking today a little bit about the difference between what is a water supply option and a strategy. But the overall objective is to get us to a place where we are building comprehensive portfolios that really suggest an overall strategy, how you as a district want to be running things to meet your long-term objectives with this planning effort. And so a lot of the input that we're going to get today is going to help us in starting that process as we move from individual ideas to more holistic strategies. And a lot of the evaluation that we do is going to happen at that stage, right? We're going to do some option screening at the beginning, but then we're really going to get into talking about evaluation criteria and how we're going to look at these overall strategies at that next portfolio stage. And then you'll see the last thing there is December 2025 will be done. But of course, we're not going to leave, right, this forever. What we hope to create is an ongoing dynamic planning process for you that even though the plan is completed, that's going to live on and that you're going to be able to extend and use for years to come as you move towards implementation. So that's the pathway that we are on and where we are on in it. I'm going to get this right. There we go. So more technically, that same pathway is expressed here in our overall scope. So we've looked at this work plan before, but I just want to point out a few things here for you relative to where we are and where we're going. So you see on the top part, this is where we have all of the workshops with staff that we call extended team workshops, advisory workshops that we have with our interested parties that have been with us along the process, and of course board meetings. And you'll see the red line indicating early February where we are today at this board meeting today. And you can see how that then translates to on the planning process that we're in the options and strategies development phase, and that from that we'll be looking at the feasibility of options to screen them. Then we're going to be looking at, while we're doing that, building portfolio themes and the portfolios themselves. We're going to evaluate them. We're going to support you through that evaluation and making decisions on which of those strategies or those portfolios you want to move forward with. And then we'll talk about implementation planning and then doing the document. So you can see this is where we are today. The next opportunity where we're going to come back to you, you can see is going to be in the springtime when we've kind of made it through an early idea of what some of these themes could be and what some of these portfolios can be based on the input that we've received today and through we're sort of in the season right now of doing a lot of interested party workshops and getting a lot of input from them. We'll talk a little bit about that later on the supply option development and the strategy development. So then once we have that, we get to come back to you and talk portfolios of how these things can all knit together and whether that makes sense to you and how we're going to evaluate those. And so with that, if there's any questions on sort of where we are in the process or where we're headed, I'd be happy to answer.
Real quick question on my end.
Mhm.
If you can just jog my memory, at the top it talks about maintaining the web portal throughout the duration of this. Can you just remind me what the web portal is?
Sure. It's not called a website, right? It's an elevated version of website, right? And the idea behind it is that it's not only just meant to convey information about, hey, we're doing a planning process, here's some information and here's some PDFs that you can look at. A portal is meant to imply that it's actually going to have some interactive opportunities, and that's going to be some of the things that we're doing in concert with the interested party meetings. So the interested party meetings that we're going to be having that I think Ethan's going to touch on in next steps, but as a headliner for that, the feedback that we got through that process is that they're going to be virtual. That's what, we did the survey and that's what people said they wanted to do, they wanted to do those meetings virtually. And then also we're using a tool called, which I think we brought to the board at some point, this tool Conveyo that provides interactive ways of providing input throughout the process. And so we're going to be having widgets that go in that allow for, fun activities and focused activities to get specific input from interested parties if they couldn't attend those workshops. And from all of you and from the public as well. And so I think when we say portal, that's what we mean. So those have yet to appear. Those are actually being worked on right now as we speak by people of our team that are not here today. So those will be coming up very soon because the interested party workshops that we'll be having are next week. So those are going to be coming up. So your question's timely. So right now it looks like a web page, but it'll look cooler soon. More portal-esque. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right, so just as a reminder, as we tee up this conversation today of reminding about the goals and objectives. There we go. All of you as directors really provided the guidance for what these goals are, and we established these. And it just as a reminder of the 5 areas, not only do we want to do water supply portfolios that leverage local resources and adapt to climate change, which is probably the main one that we know that we're focused on. We also know that it's important from all of you and as a district that you want to use this water resources master planning effort to come up with strategies that also address affordable and equitable supply for all direct and indirect customers. Making sure that the system itself is resilient and optimized, the infrastructure system, so that we're running the system in an operational way that is resilient and optimized. And that we also have interest in being good watershed stewards and having healthy watersheds and aquifers that are managed to provide multiple benefits. And that as a district, you have an opportunity that you want to exercise of being collaborative and showing leadership to facilitate regional water management throughout this area. And so with those goals in mind, we also developed specific planning objectives of how are we going to conduct this planning to help us achieve those goals through this process. And so just as a quick reminder, comprehensive. That's really this first one. We wanted to make sure we're comprehensive. And that's really a great theme for today's discussion. We're not going to talk about the supply options today from a perspective of which one's better and which one's worse. We want to talk about from the perspective of, have we got all the ideas down, and are we articulating the ideas that people have about supply options correctly? That's really the focus. We're not saying, you know, which one we like better or not yet. That's going to come once we look at holistic portfolios and once we do the option screening. We also want to make sure that we're doing a process that addresses future uncertainty and risk. It's going to help prepare for the near-term decisions we're going to make through this planning process, as well as teeing everyone up for what are the drivers for future decisions that will need to be made once we're done with this planning process. That all lends itself to, of course, making sure that we have an adaptive, dynamic, and feasible implementation pathway that we map out, that it's aligned with funding opportunities as part of that implementation strategy, and that we're making sure throughout this whole process that we're facilitating staff and board involvement, which is why we're all here today, as well as public and potential collaborator engagement. So that's public engagement and, of course, the interested party work that we're talking about. And of course, making sure that we're using this through the portal or whatever mechanisms we have, that we're using this as an opportunity to educate your customers about water and ACWD's purview within that. And then, of course, supporting the development of related planning efforts. And so we're keeping mind of that as we go through as well. So before we kick off into the supply option discussion, we have a section on supply options, and the supply options have been way further developed. They're way more complex than the strategies. And so that's why you're really seeing a focus on the supply options today, the 42. These are things that are primarily coming from previous work, from conversations that we've had with you as directors as well as staff. And so the idea with a supply option is it needs to generate a unit of supply for the district that can then be used by your customers. But it needs to be comprehensive, and then it goes beyond just identifying a supply source like imported water, but that has all the components necessary for it to be able to actually realize that water for your customers' use. In contrast to that, we have resource strategies. So these are not necessarily focused on meeting a certain unit of supply. A lot of these won't actually generate. In fact, all of them won't generate a unit of supply. That's the work of the supply options. These are projects that may cost resources, time, money, energy towards implementing, but there are other objectives and goals that those are meeting by implementing them. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those categories today. We don't have a fully developed list of those strategies. That's a lot of the heavy lifting that's going to be happening at the interested party workshops next week. We're going to get a lot of content for those. So we're little different stages with these, and that's why you've got only the list of supply options that have been included with your board packet. Okay. So let's get into some of these supply options, unless there's any questions before I do.
Actually, just hold on a sec. Do we have any questions or comments from the directors so far? If not,
Maybe whether to make the comments now or later, but,
how,
let me
how about,
start.
how about later? Let's work on clarification comments first. And I am going to give our customers online and in-room, opportunity to ask questions, clarification questions. Do we have any questions online for the board or the presenter? If so, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any. How about in the room? I know we have at least one members of the public. Do you have any questions for us or for the presenter? No? Okay. Hold on. I think in terms of process, do we want comments now or shift the comments to later?
Is this one of your is this one of your three pause periods or this?
No.
No, okay,
So
so-
we'll wait for
So I
details.
would ask Director Wee to hold until when is the time slot
I'll
scheduled for
hold it.
comments,
Thank you.
please.
I'm
Thank you.
going to put on my clairvoyance cap and say you probably have some comments about the actual options themselves.
I know I do,
I,
but we'll wait
okay,
till
so
later.
let's
My-
go.
My primary concern is timelines. 25 years is a relatively short time.
It is.
In the water world.
Mhm.
This is a timeline that'll address operations and maintenance programs, not true long-term planning. It'll help address what we're doing in the interim, but we are not, if you're thinking of completing it 25 years, we need a broader context, one that goes well beyond the 25-year mark in our policies and where we want to be and what we want to do.
Yeah, and I think the timeline is a great topic of, and maybe that's a great thing to touch on before we get through these options is, we said 2050, right? But I think, we also know that climate change impacts may happen after that. Some may say they're already happening now and we're responding to that condition now. And I think the way that we've been sort of thinking about it in context is we know that we need to focus on what are actions that could be taken between now and 2050. And maybe some of these things might not actually be online yet, but there's things that you should be prioritizing based on the decisions that you'll make through this process. We should start in on this now. What's the timeline to get to there? What are our options? And there's going to be decisions that you're going to have to make later. But what can we do through this process to help create a framework by which you can make those decisions? You know which ones they are. You know what are the triggers for those decisions. And then you're prepared to have a discussion again when those timings are happening.
If I can follow up very briefly, climate change.
Mm,
It can be quantified, which is primarily sea level rise. The Delta Conveyance Authority says 2.2 feet at the Golden Gate in the life of the Delta Tunnel.
mm-hmm.
That's about a foot per decade. And this approximately 2 feet. FEMA currently at 11 feet. I'm talking about going to 14, but they're going to have to go over 20.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you can quantify and at least put in reference that if we are addressing it, do we address it in the longer term? Or do
Right.
we address what our needs are in the 25-year window?
So Director Wee, I think this is actually a little bit of a policy discussion. We're the one that
Mhm.
set the 25-year horizon, right? In terms of climate change impact, it is one of our objectives, and I think we could have that in the options discussion on impact,
It is, yeah.
right?
Could I tie together what Director Huang's saying and what Persephone's saying?
Go
Yeah,
for it.
We did together scope whether we wanted to go beyond 2050. And the big, as Persephone mentioned, if you think of this as being this deviation from a center line, for whomever can see, I'm swinging my hands around wildly. As we're moving forward in time in the sort of linear process with climate change, the breadth and the realm of possible future scenarios that we are going to be facing starts to really widen beyond 2050. And so the discussion we had early on in the process was, do we want to really try and commit to solving problems that are in that hugely uncertain future? Or do we want to take a shorter term approach with a mind towards the future past 2050, acknowledging that uncertainty is just going to get exponential, get much greater? So do we want to have a mind toward that without trying to solve You know, we're not trying to land on Mars right now. We're trying to get us through to the mid part of the century so that we can get closer to that uncertainty, have a better sense of what to plan for. So we did with the climate adaptation plan initially, sort of nail that down. And this plan is building off of that to sort of give us a more structured near-term plan, but not losing sight of the long-term, as Director Weed, you so rightly point out. It could be really bad, but we're not going to solve that problem at this time, not without assuming incredible risk financially or other. Is that helpful?
And Director Weed, if I may, I think would also be at the pleasure of the board if we wish to update this plan much sooner, if we notice there are impacts, much severe impacts,
My
right?
point being that this is not a long-term plan in water terms.
No.
This is a short-term support of our operations and maintenance.
And,
we
and,
currently have in place.
and
I think
equivalent to the plan we are replacing, which was a 30-year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is the best time frame that we could make, at least for me personally, a defensible decision, right? We still have a lot of unknown, a lot of variables, but at this time frame, I think it's something that we could sort of put our arms around. But anyway, moving on, I will stop making comment and breaking my own rules.
No, fair enough. All right, so let's take a look at building the list of options and strategies. So again, just to reiterate, how did we get to this point? We had input during phase one. Us as a consultant team, we also provided input to this process. Certainly leadership and staff and interested parties to get to the list. And of course, like I said, we're still in the interested party zone. So we are looking for more and more, especially in the strategies category. I think the extended workshop that we had with your staff was excellent, and we were able to get a lot of great ideas and also put some refinements on a lot of the supply options that we had. And now we're sort of, in order to do strategies, we're really looking to elevate that list through the interested party work. So when we say comprehensive, right, that was one of the planning objectives. It's comprehensive sort of in two ways. One is being comprehensive from making sure we get all the ideas and suggestions out on the table. We're not saying whether they're good or bad yet. It's an idea, it's a suggestion, it's in. We want to be comprehensive. So that's why we did all that outreach. But then when we talk about supply options, we also want to be comprehensive in how we look at them. You know, some of the discussions that we had up to tonight have been, you know, supply source focused supply options or storage focused supply options. Like we should do something with semi-tropic, or we should be doing leveraging imported water. Those concepts on their own are not really a complete supply option, right? It's the knitting together all of those components that ensure we're moving from the source to actually making it all the way to getting that water to your customers. And there are costs, opportunities, and challenges all along that. And that's what we want to be baking into what a supply option is, right? So if you see here, a great way to look at it is supply source. Does that source need to be conveyed in some way? Is it using existing facilities? Is it needing new facilities? Is it upgrading facilities that we already have on getting that supply here? Does it need to be stored? What kind of storage? Is it annual storage? Is it seasonal? Is it long-term? Does that water then need to be treated for its end use? And how will that treatment happen for its end, in keeping with the water quality needed for its end use? And then how does that impact where that water supply is coming into the distribution system? How does that then impact your operations of how you distribute that water? Again, this is another opportunity to look at the equity lens as well as where that water is being distributed. And some of the strategies that we actually get into will probably touch on some of those operational components as well, even though they're not yielding an actual unit of supply. So there's a little bit of gray area when we start talking about distribution, we start talking about operational components of a supply option. You could also think of them as strategies helping to meet some of the other objectives or the other goals as well. But for now, the important thing to note is that for each of the supply options that you have on your list, all of these components were considered. Some of the supply options that we have don't need storage, or they don't need treatment, or they don't need some of these components, and that's okay. But the point is that we thought about that. Does it need conveyance? Does it need storage? Does it need treatment? So the resulting list is the components that we felt were needed as a result of having a complete supply option. So there's different ways that you can group these, right? And that's always some of the fun that we have as a consultant team working with staff. How can we start to get our arms around all of these different options? One of the ways you can do it is grouping it by the supply source, which again is just that first component. So you'll have on your sheet, you'll see that they're coded, right? There's like IW1, IW2, LW, there's GW. And so those correspond to groupings, a nomenclature that we've used that are groupings according to where the sources, where the supply is sourced from. So imported water is IW. Groundwater, which we'll talk about, because groundwater is an exciting place where there's a lot of overlap because, you know, sometimes you're talking about the water that's used to recharge the groundwater that you're then producing. And is that imported water if it's coming from an imported water source, or is that groundwater because you're producing it out of the ground? So that's one of the other things we have to be careful of, that we're not double counting groundwater as well as any sort of recharge supply. But for the purposes of this, we have imported water, groundwater, recycled water, local surface water, ocean bay water, and then conservation. You won't see conservation on this option slide, and I want to just chat a little bit about that with you. So conservation is an incredibly important aspect of this planning process. It's so important that you have a parallel but yet integrated process going on that we've been working with staff that have been engaged in that. And so right now, the way that we're looking at conservation in this planning effort is really understanding what is it that we can get out of that parallel process that's going to be determining how you're going to be meeting the urban water use objectives that you've already agreed as a board that you're going to meet. So there's a conservation scoping and a conservation method and conservation implementation discussion that's happening that's specific towards making sure that you as a district meet that. When that is completed, we're going to take that, whatever that plan is that comes out of that, and we're going to assume that that's going to be baseline in all of the work that we're doing moving forward. Why we still have it in here is because through that process, we're anticipating that there could be conservation strategies that come out that could be in addition to meeting the urban water use objectives that would go beyond, beyond the minimum that you do have to do. So we want to make sure that we're capturing those strategies and that we're including them, because that's a decision for later, right? That you could tee up, you know, a portfolio that could have more increased conservation where you go beyond meeting your urban water use objective in difference to developing a different form of supply. So there's a gray area right now where we're waiting until that process matures, but we're completely intersecting it to the point where one of our interested party workshops is going to be on conservation and focusing on that, how you're going to meet water use objectives. But the outcomes of that are two. One is, what is the plan that you're going to use to meet those objectives, and what are other things that you could consider as a unit of conserved supply with a cost that you can put up against actual supply options. I don't know why I'm having a hard time with this clicker. Did you? Thank you. So here's just a brief overview of the kinds of options that you have in there that are just sort of grouped by supply source. So you have imported water options. We wanted to make sure that we thought through all of these bullets, that we had options in there that touch on all of these bullets, whether it's state water project, all the different forms of that, SFPUC, water transfers, which are more temporary, granted, but we wanted to bake that in. And then also the potential of getting involved with CVP. On the local surface water place, you have options that focus on Alameda Creek, as well as other local runoff. Groundwater, again, this is a little bit of a nuance here because it could be looked at when you're looking at a complete supply option. Where's the water coming from, and is it only just being produced? But, you know, we have ones that are focused on Niles Cone, as well as potentially new groundwater areas, both locally and further out. And then, of course, there's a suite of options around ocean and bay water, both local and regional. And when we say local and regional here, what we mean is local meaning more control, fewer partners, regional meaning part of a larger group. And then recycled water, is also, these are the categories from 2 different suppliers, right, of recycled water. And so that's basically an overview of all the different options that you see. We wanted to make sure we had something in each of these categories. So I'm just going to move on now to another way that you could look at grouping these options. One is sort of by storage and extent. So you see local groundwater storage, right? There's a lot of these water supply options that are tied to how we're managing local groundwater basins. From a storage perspective, as a production perspective, lots of different sources of supply that could be brought into the groundwater basin. And this is where you have a lot of control, right? And working with your partners in the local area, right? And then we have sort of this world of imported water storage, right? Where there's banks that are outside of the area where it could be a lot of in lieu transfers with groundwater banks that are off of the imported water systems. This could be groundwater banks, it could be above ground storage, and all the suite of different options there. Regional are ones that, again, are sort of large programs that may or may not be led by ACWD, that could be led by others that you have to decide whether you're interested in participating or not in. And then local options are things that maybe it has more control with you as a district, or maybe you have another partner or a smaller number of partners that you're working together on developing those. And there's no right or wrong. You could probably put some of these in each of the different categories. It's just, again, a different way to start to sort of get your arms around 42 different line items here. So with that, I'm not going to get into option by option by option, but I am going to turn it over to Philippe, who's going to facilitate a discussion about these options, being mindful of the fact that our major discussion that's coming up that Philippe indicated is moving on beyond options and really having a more robust discussion about what we need from you as we head towards portfolio building.
So let's leave the slide up. And the question really is, are there any options that are missing? Not only from this list, but from the handout you have. I know you've been able to review this. So what options do you think are missing?
So I think I mentioned it earlier, direct potable reuse.
So direct potable reuse, meaning not just the notion of raw water augmentation, but actually flange to flange treated water
That's correct.
augmentation. Okay, noted. True
Director Wee?
DPR
Where do I start?
at the beginning.
I was going to suggest, because we're looking for specific options in the current framework, it's more difficult because we're talking about working with our current system. That we develop at the end a long-term goals and principles how water districts should control, and in my mind, that's own the water sources, watershed, reservoirs, pipelines, control it. We see a little bit of that, such as the Sonol Aqueduct, the Niles Canyon Aqueduct. That we participate, that we own the water bank in the valley if we're going to do it. Follow the Irvine Ranch approach. Santa Clara Valley Water District is now working with Irvine Ranch to acquire additional groundwater farmland that they will own and control. Because reliability was not mentioned in your list of priorities as you came in your process. How reliable will that water be?
So can I just pause for a second just to clarify? So you're, in our parlance, you're thinking a portfolio that embodies Alameda County Water District control as much as possible of all the elements. The supply option would be an important thing.
Recognize regulatory and legislative risk.
Mm-hmm.
Do not use natural channels for open water conveyance, open channels. Get the hell out of Alameda Creek. We're going to look back, and future boards will look back and the $100 million award-winning inflatable dam and fish ladder project, and I recognize it as a folly in the bigger term, in the bigger context. We have the ability to keep the water in pipelines. Policy just channel them. Put it in a pipeline. Use an open channel. Recognize that we've got emerging contaminants. PFAS being the latest, probably be followed by microplastics and hormones and pharmaceuticals. So in the bigger picture, and that's beyond, probably beyond the 25-year limit, but it's something that's coming in the future. And then response to a contingency. In an earlier discussion, we'd asked that you identify a methodology, what we would do if we lost one or more of our major water supply systems for 6 months or more. We have a groundwater reservoir, we can do that. And next, the ability to go into water marketing. We have a surplus of water. We have twice the capacity of what our demand is. We've gone off on some tangents, spent $30 million on ultrafiltration in a plant which we have now closed and mothballed, which is Mission San Jose, because we didn't need the extra 5 MGD. Finally, it was a final decision, even though we ran into technical challenges with it. But those all come into an additional role, cost center for the district. We've recently done some water marketing with a district in the San Joaquin Valley, Bakersfield. That could become a major source for us because we're at the hub of a number of various water supplies that we, as we get more and more control, we can become a major water purveyor as well as treatment and seller of treated water.
Thank you,
So
Director Weed.
let me just capture there seems to be 3 threads here that I hear. Number one is thinking about a future that reduces risk
Yes.
by consolidating as much control as possible, reducing a number of these risks you've articulated. And to some degree, articulating that portfolio, while being future, you could actually think about that in terms of which elements would be upwardly compatible with that vision, if that is a vision that the board wants to go. So that's one thread I took. The second thread was just a question in terms of how we're going to evaluate these portfolios relative to risk scenarios. And you just mentioned this one risk scenario of a 6-month outage. And then finally, I heard you say that we are situated at a crossroads with a lot of infrastructure, a great location. What does that mean in terms of the asset that we have here in terms of watermarking other alternatives? So does that capture your?
We could expand our function.
Okay.
An example of this would be had we had this mindset in place with our last 25-year review, we would now own the N3 Ranch, 50,000 acres.
Oh, right. I
of
think
watershed.
we're
We
straying.
had 4 playgrounds set up.
So,
So we count a 3 to 2 foot.
so let's focus back on this presentation.
Yeah.
I think your question for the board and actually our customer is, are we missing anything?
Right. So we have one option that's missing, and then to the portfolio, thinking
Right.
about a portfolio that maximizes control. Any other options that seem to be missing off of this list?
I'll just say I didn't feel like there were any options missing.
Okay.
You know, the list is, it's pretty extensive. I think a option, I mean, short of water rights on Mars, the moon, or maybe Europa, those are a little bit further out. Something, I mean, things change real fast. Los Vasqueros is all but dead, if not dead. And I'd like to see some life still in it, but it doesn't seem to be there. You've got sites on the list. But what happens if we lose Los Vasqueros from an option? We had 2. Now we only have 1. We've got to change at the feds. Governor's kind of on board with some of this option to have storage, surface storage. If something crops up, we want to have it in our list. At least to look at it. I mean, we've looked at sites, didn't matter, but we were looking at Los Vasqueros, and of course it's gone. That's one of the items I would say maybe. I don't know how to put that in there.
Well, in some ways, it's how adaptable is the process to
Yeah.
new alternatives emerging?
If you look at our last 5 years, correct, we had a treatment plant, maybe it's 10 now, We got to service, and we don't need it at the moment. 10, 15 years ago, we thought we needed it. Things changed.
Yeah.
And things are gonna change. So I like the list.
Thank you. And I think to that point, Director Akbari?
I was just gonna add on to that, because I do agree with having the ability to scale up or down with any of these sources would be, I think would be a good option for us, because we've seen that we've utilized that in the past. And so I just want to echo that comment as well.
Yeah, and when you get this next list of options, we'll be looking at things like yield and scalability and those other factors. And for the ones that are not carried through, we will document why at this time they're not being carried forward. So that's documented in case they need to be reopened in the future. So with that, let's move on.
Actually,
Oh,
I was going to see if we have any comments online or in the boardroom. For those that's participating online, raise your hand if you have any comments or recommendations, suggestions, something that we're missing. I am not seeing any hand in the room. Did you identify anything that we're missing that we should put in our consideration in terms of water supply sources? I am not seeing any hands up either. Okay, then moving on. Thank you.
Actually, I would like to read in sort of for the record, we have comments from Director Sethi who submitted some input.
So is this the appropriate time, or are we going to
This is.
have another more detailed discussion on the options? I was
This was
wondering
just a
about-
discussion on water supply options. He just
Okay.
expressed a couple opinions.
Okay, go for
I'll
it.
just read them in for the record, and if they merit discussion later, we can bring them back up. Director Sethi says, in favor of every project that has desal in the name of the subject matter. In favor of all projects that say intertie for the local area, i.e. San Francisco. Liked looking at all the options on Lake Del Val, and he would like to better understand alternatives of groundwater banking. I think some of that we'll be touching on later.
Thank you. Moving on, please.
All right. So as I indicated at the beginning, the strategies, these water resources strategies are behind, I would say tracking behind the energy and effort that we put on getting the water supply options to this point. And that's okay, because I think a lot of the strategies, I think, are going to be informed from our conversations that we had on focusing on water supply options, but also from our interested parties that we're going to be hearing from. So what we wanted to talk with you today about is when we talk about this sort of amorphous idea of water resources strategies, what are the certain areas that we're talking about? And also be able to, the question that we have that Philippe is going to ask you is really focused around, does this make sense, or are there other strategy areas that we should be considering to help us achieve all 5 of the goals that we've laid out instead of just the first goal, which is water supply focused? So we talked a little bit about operational improvements. So this is a category that could have a lot of different benefits. It could, and I think I mentioned this earlier, it could help with some of the discussions that we've had about where the water source is coming from and how it's distributed across your service area, and considering an equitability about that and those water sources, as that is something that was brought up earlier in our process. Also in just the effort of resiliency and increasing reliability. It may not be that adding in redundancy into a system or adding in other operational strategies in a system or infrastructure in a system nets any actual water, but it could improve the way that the system is operated. It can improve the resiliency of the system. It could also improve distribution and meet other objectives through the system. So those are things that, you know, some of them are probably baked in, like I said, to the supply options already. And some of them may come out through this process of just add-ons that we'll want to integrate into the portfolios. The other area that we're focused on a lot next week is really on watershed stewardship. We have a watershed stewardship interested party workshop that's happening. And there's actually a lot of work that the district has done in this area. And I think one of the questions that we want to ask the interested parties is, how do we build upon that, right? What are the successes that you see? What are the concerns that you have? And then how do we build upon those strategies to be good stewards in the watershed? And the way that we've been sort of looking at this initially is that there's sort of 3 zones of the watershed. One is sort of the upper watershed area where you have a lot of source water quality protection issues, right? Like that's where a lot of the local supply is originating. And so how those watershed lands are managed in those areas impacts ACWD and its mission and what it's trying to achieve from a source water quality perspective. But how you manage the lands and how you partner with those that have those lands in those areas and also have shared benefits and shared opportunities in those areas can also provide other multiple benefits that benefit the overall watershed from an environmental perspective, a recreation perspective, a community, an economic perspective. And so those are the sorts of things that we want to be looking at when we're talking about watershed stewardship. But we want to make sure that we're always steering that towards being in line with what you as a water district also can and can't do. So sometimes it might be supportive. Hey, we support the salt bond restorations that are happening over at the Bay, but how much of that is really within ACWD's control? You know, and so those are the kinds of things that we're going to be exploring, or they could be direct actions that you could take, like a lot of the fish restoration that you have done over the past few years. Obviously, they provide great benefits to you as a district by participating in that and your relationship with nymphs and your relationship with water supply. But there's opportunities there maybe for continuation of that work in maintaining steelhead environment within those areas. And that kind of leads us also to sort of the Quarry Lakes area, right? That's something, that's a part of your watershed, right? That middle part where it's like you do have a good amount of control. That is your home base. That is your area. So what are some of the strategies there where people sort of look to you as a district, especially in the Quarry Lakes area, of how you're managing that area with all the other multiple benefits that it provides to the communities around environmental water quality, habitat for birds and fish, as well as then, you know, overall recreation water quality, blue-green algae, all of those things that are going on in there that are a result of climate change that you as a district can decide, you know, how are you going to participate in that? And so the strategies that we hope to hear will be along those lines. Those are just some examples that we may hear. And then we're going to come back and say, okay, some of those may have costs, right? So we need to develop those. We need to understand what it would take for you all to participate, what role you would have. And that's the way we're going to further characterize those strategies and then bake those in with the supply options to overall holistic portfolios. The other speaks to policy and leadership. So there's a lot here with water use efficiency, a lot of collaboration with folks at the city level that you serve, right? And because the customers are members of the city and they're also ratepayers to you. And so how does that work from a policy and leadership standpoint? Also looking at storage levels, different rate structures, this relationship between stormwater and the goal of a lot of those that have stormwater quality requirements. How can you partner as a district with them for advancing water supply and water quality, basin, groundwater basin quality management, but yet also understanding that there are partners in your area that have different requirements that maybe you can come up with strategies that actually help meet both from an environmental water quality perspective. So there's also all different kinds of, you know, policy and leadership that we want to hear from you. And I think that tees up the question for Philippe, right? To have a discussion around sort of where we are at this early stage.
So first, before you step away, Persephone, are there any clarifications on these items that she's presented? And then we want to see, is there anything else we need to capture? So first, any clarifications on what Persephone has presented? I see one shake of the head, no.
Let me, again, be the critic. Unlike San Francisco PUC or East Bay Mud, we have pitifully little watershed to worry about. Little control, and we're on players. We passed up one opportunity. So my reasons are that really, I don't see how those, well, that the watershed element really is significant to ACWD. Operational improvements, I think contingency operations is something I'd like to see put in there because we need to be able to respond to a major catastrophe or even a small one. Dealing with our city governments is a challenge, particularly the larger city. And the rate structure is unfortunate, but I'm not a fan of tiered rates or staged rates. So I think you can structure rates that match fixed costs with
I,
fixed
I
income. and
think we
variable
could
costs
have
with
that
variable.
conversation next week. It
So
will be on
these
the
are my
agenda.
areas of leadership that we have either not been an issue for us or in the policy and leadership area where we have floundered. Thank you.
So let me clarify one statement you made about watershed stewardship. One of the planning objectives is healthy watersheds. To what degree, or what does that mean to you in terms of how that's expressed?
We don't have watershed. And other third parties have it, third parties operate it. It's like asking a customer, what do you think about the operation? One of our customers in ACWD, what do you think about the operation of your treatment plant?
So anything beyond the direct control of the district is kind of,
It's not a direct issue for us.
okay.
I don't.
Any other
Well, there's
clarification comments?
lots of disagreement on many of these issues. First thing, you just can't throw out the environmental rules. Doesn't work that way. But to work with them and you could try to affect them. I like the concept. Yes, we don't have a big watershed, but we do have a watershed, and one of it's called the Niles Count. We have a fairly good control over the Niles Cone and what happens there. So that's their rates. I don't see rates, where we go with our rates. Obviously there's disagreements on our rates. It's on the chart here. It could affect how much maybe, but realistically, I don't see that being an issue. There's various options and we'll be doing more discussion on rates over the next 10 years and it'll change again, I'm sure. 10 years from now, it'll probably be a whole different argument, whole different game. I love the concept of working with others, but a lot of times the others don't want to play. I think we have, as a district, shown that we're willing to work with others. And I think as a district, we've seen ourselves get hit a couple times. We got to keep playing the game. There's several things on the list that I think would be good options, but politics may step in the way. And while that's not part of this, we got to be willing to play that game. Otherwise, we're going to lose. So long-term reliability, I don't think there's anybody here that wants more reliability than me. I've said it in multiple meetings, you might appreciate it. Coast Guard background, I know what it's like not to have water. And it's not a fun thing. Reliability needs to be number one. You turn the faucet on, it doesn't come out. Doesn't matter how good it is, doesn't matter how cheap it is. If it doesn't come out, it is absolutely worthless. Haven't done our job. So to me, liability, resilience, yes, because that's part of reliability. Ability to distribute water equitably. Well, I live in Union City. We have the nice hard water. So, but you know what? The water's wet. Water. And I'm happy with that.
So Director Gunther, I wanted to clarify one thing. Maybe it's a preview of coming attractions, but it's the notion of rates. And we have written into our goals affordability. And of course, operationalizing what that means. So we recognize that there's a lot of different things that drive your rates. This will be one of the inputs. The rest of your CIP is an input. What we're going to do from an evaluation criteria standpoint is simply characterize the cost and the benefits. The question of what defines affordability is really going to be a policy decision that continues to rest with you.
And that's critical. You know, yeah, there's options on here that rate-wise may not work.
Right.
There might be
And you
something else
mentioned the
that does.
reliability. You want reliability. And again, you're going to have to make that trade-off, fundamental policy issue.
I have a one-page memo that I'll give you, or two-page memo actually, on equity and water supply.
Thank you. Any other comments, inputs here? Director Akbari?
I don't think anything is missing from this list, and I largely agree with a lot of the comments from Director Gunther. Director Weed just touched on in the operational improvements been adding in contingency planning, which I know has been like a big concern for Director Weed. If we're adding that in, then I would probably add that under policy and leadership as well to protect against legal and legislative challenges.
Mhm.
But I think other than that, I feel like this is pretty comprehensive and captures at least the main points that I would have considered.
Yes. So when we stress test the portfolios, we're going to have to identify what risk scenarios we're stress testing against. And we're also going to have to make some definitions, some bifurcations, maybe some policy implications. So you've talked about the 6-month water outage. You'll have to kind of assess the cost and benefits of a non-potable provision of water for 6 months versus a potable provision of water, because those are different levels of service and different price tags. So I think preview again of coming attractions and things you'll need to weigh in on terms of what are the scenarios against which we're going to stress test the portfolios.
But note that our primary goal in an emergency is to provide water, provide fire flows and sanitary flows. Potable water is the responsibility of the county.
Yep.
So, and health department. So recognizing that we have a groundwater reservoir, which we should utilize and have ways to tap into it. We should not necessarily rely on our current water distribution system, which may be lost in a major earthquake.
Right.
All right,
Okay.
so with that, I actually agree with Dr. Gunther and Akbari's comments. I think this is pretty comprehensive. I probably have a slightly different take. I thought emergency response or adaptive management of our system is under improved operational resilience. So maybe I made a bit assumption there. Sorry about that. I don't think we have any more public attendees online. So any comments from our one public member in the room? Nope. Okay, thank you.
Actually, I'd like
Yes.
to hit on Director Weed's comment about the non-potable after a major earthquake. Do we want to include something on here, a concept of, is that an option that would help us? Do we want to build that option into our system perhaps? Just throwing it out there, it may cost money, may not.
And I think it also raises the
For
question,
Fire flow.
if for fire flow and other reasons you want to keep the system pressurized, providing water, then this is a question of where do your investments need to go? As you mentioned,
Right.
if your distribution system is gone, you know, so then it's kind of another thing that this plan touches, as you had
So-
asked earlier, how do you dovetail this with your infrastructure
Right.
master
So,
plan?
right, that would be the question I have on the list on some of these options. But I think to be very fair, perhaps what Director Weed and Gunther is identifying, maybe you are missing one more options, which is using non-potable groundwater use, right? Perhaps that would be an option that we carry forward.
Mhm.
I do understand staff is asking us to narrow down the list and we're adding more things to it, but I think that's what I am hearing. Are you saying you want a option on non-potable water use as in dual piping?
No,
I'm just
Well,
trying to be fair and trying to
Here-
capture
here's
your need
maybe
in
I-
this.
maybe I'll try to drill down a little bit in that, you know, we have wells, we have system. If we lose very big pieces of the system, I don't know if we've ever looked at it. Thomas
See.
probably has, but the concept of pressurizing the entire system with non-potable water
Mhm.
for emergency to get us over that hump.
So we do have emergency wells that are able. But to be clear, I heard reference ideas of building a whole separate non-potable district. Emergency. I want to make,
No.
that's not what we're talking
No,
about. Right?
that's not. what we're
Okay,
talking
so that's not the ask, then I am going to say perhaps this discussion could be better had when we bring back the emergency response plan. Is that
Maybe-
what I'm hearing?
Let me raise one issue. We did, there was a point when we had done our planning, a pilot project out near Alameda, where we would use local groundwater for irrigation, utilize the purple pipe that was being laid. because We
Untreated.
have purple pipe systems in parts that are down,
Mhm,
and use raw groundwater,
mhm.
not recycled water for that. And that would also be able to provide a local water source for firefighting, being able to fill up the tenders to be able to support it. Being able to use let's say $400 an acre foot water rather than $4,000 an acre foot water for significant landscaping.
I
would be
believe
our
Mr.
benefit.
Nizer has a comment.
Sure, just round out a little bit of the history. So at one point, this district, with the board's direction from 1995, was building a purple pipe network. And we were doing that very incrementally and opportunistically as new development was occurring. And so what we have is a mile here and a quarter mile there, and the idea was this backbone would get built with the intention of completing that backbone and eventually connecting it to a non-potable supply from recycled water. The proposal came up and it penciled out quite nicely, as Director Weed's saying, to, in the interim, begin using that purple pipe and serving raw groundwater into that purple pipe while it was still being assembled, and start serving those customers and bringing in revenue and utilizing that infrastructure before building the recycled water plant down the road. With the long-term objective of building that purple pipe network, it made a bit of sense. You were putting in lower cost water and you were providing it for a non-essential, interruptible demand irrigation. But it really hinged on the long-term intent to build a full purple reticulation system and connect it to a recycled water supply. In 2019, this board in an IRP workshop, we presented the declining viability of a non-potable system. There's less and less, there's never going to be a golf course. The power plant that was going to be here isn't going to happen. And there's less and less arable turf that needs or could utilize this water. And so we saw the cost economics of a non-potable system just continue to plummet. Meanwhile, we were looking at the evolution of potable reuse, specifically indirect potable reuse, and a higher yield potential at a much lower cost. This board uniformly elected, there may have been one dissenter, I don't recall the exact count, but to put an end to pursuing construction of purple pipe and to end pursuit of non-potable water reuse. So that's where we were and how we've gotten to here. I just want to emphasize that the cost effectiveness, it was very low cost, but if you weren't going to build out that whole system, it would actually be very expensive because now you're building a millions and millions of dollar system to provide a very small amount of water. So if we wanted to pencil out building a purple system just to meet the small amount of irrigation demand, we could do that, but I could tell you right now, it's not going to be cost effective.
Recycled water doesn't work. We looked at indirect potable reuse, 3 to 4 times the cost of our other water supplies. It doesn't make sense. I'm not a fan of recycled water, but I do think the infrastructure we do have in place and the ability to put in wells strategically placed throughout the, with pumps, 2,500 GPM or more, that can be a water source in case of a major problem in a community. And that I think is something we can investigate, and we still have much of that infrastructure in place now. Why don't we try to utilize it where we do have it? We don't need to go to the.
So what I
assume
hear is
that
the
we
action
need the whole
here
thing.
is that it's confirming the groundwater supply availability to serve, and then to determine the sufficiency of our infrastructure to deliver that water in an emergency situation, non-potable. And then the final thing is to simply decide, where does that reside? Is that in the infrastructure reliability plan? You need to look at where your next dollar for reliability investment goes for an emergency response, or here. So I think that's what we need to take back as a team and then figure out where it resides. That good?
Yep,
Okay,
that works. Thank
let's
you.
go on to our next.
I just wanted to make one comment. So when we've come and talked with the board, this idea of emergency versus long-term has come up consistently. There's lots of opportunities for that nexus to come up. One of the troubles that we have with we'll call it mid-range planning, right? Because it's 2050, 25 years, we'll call it mid-range, is that it's not the purview to do emergency planning, right? For emergencies that take things off temporarily, right? I think the thing we're edging towards is long-term interruptions in reliability that may come about as a result of climate change or other things. And we're sort of saying, hey, those are sort of longer-term things that there's a lot of uncertainty there too. So we're sort of in this middle place, right? We've got emergency over here and we've got long-term we'll call it sea level rise impacts, where we're actually seeing beyond sort of intrusion into groundwater basins, facility disruptions and that sort of thing. So we're sort of in this middle place, which provides an opportunity for us to focus on what can we do in this middle place, but understanding how it can benefit and relate these other temporal scales, right? So as you go through and do emergency planning from more of a existing distribution master planning standpoint, one of the things that we can look at with some of the portfolios that we're building is how would that support something like emergency resilience? Would this be a net contributor to that, or would that be more limiting? That's one of the ways that we can incorporate that more emergency aspect and let you do the specific planning in that effort. Similarly on the longer term, right? And we talked about this earlier, is how can we look at what we're suggesting now as maybe providing benefits for some of the changes that could come past 2050, and how are we setting you up for addressing those conditions? And is that a net positive or a negative towards some of those assumptions?
I can agree with you. I would call it contingency, planning and engineering. It's a different way to approach. It's a third type of operations and maintenance, capital construction, and contingency. Whole different set of parameters, but one supplements and augments, so we can minor modifications. You can enhance your contingency capabilities.
Completely.
Thank you. All right, if no other comments, shall we move on?
So I think we had this one already. All right, so we're moving on from options in large part because the real discussion needs to be around how are all these concepts going to work together? Because these options as standalones, they're missing how they fit within a larger system of change in projects that you might be making. And so we're really trying to advance ourselves and push you into the portfolio place. So we look at holistically ideas of how these different 42 things, which we're hoping to get down to fewer things, can interact with each other to have an overall strategy for you to make a decision on. And that's why we're not really getting into right now with the 42 saying, hey, let's figure out what's the best options and what's not, because in concert with what may be an option that looks like it might not pencil out, if you put it in concert with some other options, maybe it starts to look better because it provides some benefits, and some of, let's say the cost is the barrier, could be ameliorated by being combined with other options that maybe share similar infrastructure. And so there could be cost efficiencies that are created by looking at these more holistically. So that's why we've been reticent to take opinions necessarily on the options. What we want to do is make sure that we're moving towards a place where we actually can look at evaluating them as whole stories. So that's a two-step process. The first step is screening down, getting from 42 to 15 to 20 supply options. And so we're going to look for you today in the conversation that Philippe is going to facilitate, guidance on helping us figure out how we're going to screen those options. Similarly, we also are looking for the same conversation, guidance on how we should start looking at what would be the themes of these comprehensive strategies. What are the types of overall approaches and philosophies towards where you should head in the future, that we can start to combine some of these options into portfolios of multiple entities. And then let's evaluate them based on a lot of the criteria, a lot of the comments that we've heard today is how are we going to evaluate them and what criteria are we going to use? And that's where we're going to bring that in. So that's a little bit later in the process, but what Philippe is going to guide us through now is going to help us with these first initial steps and moving on.
Next slide. Thank you. So really, I think we've heard a little bit already about like portfolio themes. Director Weed, in terms of maximizing control, is one thing we've heard. Director Sethi's comments read into the record. These were 4 questions that, as we were looking, as the team was looking at these options, we thought it'd be interesting to kind of probe with you. And there will probably be others, but let's just go through each of these one by one and get your response here. So in terms of, we have semi-tropic, you've been using that for a while, but we've identified a number of other alternatives in terms of groundwater banking. So what risks are we seeking to mitigate by going to other non-semi-tropic groundwater banking alternatives?
You want to start, Director Wee?
First of all, semi-tropic is suspect. Our contract ends in 2034. They're under, they're being chastised by the state of California under the SGMA. They're not in compliance. In fact, they're in significant disparities within their neighboring districts within their own groundwater basin. So we need to find, it would be foolish not to identify alternatives to semi-tropic.
So really, it's a way of managing the risk associated with the contractual term ending and SGMA potentials. Okay.
There are districts out there that are doing this now, Valley Water, et cetera, and which is working with Irvine Ranch, which is adopting some more innovative, I think, more progressive strategies. So together, we might be able to pull together $1 billion. You can buy a lot of farmland with $1 billion. LA has a valley called Owens. We could have a valley called San Joaquin. So we have the funding. We'll pay 10 times to 100 times more for the same water that ag. And ag is only 3% of the state's economy in its entirety. So the major principle is recognize our economic strength and acquire the water resources, own it so you can control it, and it becomes more reliable.
So again, this continues into your theme about maximizing control, minimizing risk.
Second, look at federal water and try to get federal water assets. State is, we've seen the legislative and regulatory risk of the state of California. Beware when the no-growth environmentalists came up with the farm interest, we could get some really strange limitations on water transfers and marketability. Feds give us another alternative and should be an area that we should be actively pursuing.
Okay, others in terms of why looking at alternative semi-tropic would be attractive.
I like
Director Gunther?
semi-tropic. And, you know, I've been with it since day one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has its limitations. Certainly, it's south of the Delta. There are possibilities and times when, you know, we may not get anything back. I knew that day one. When we had that come up, it was like, okay. I mean, anybody who understands the flow of water, if there's no water in the aqueduct,
Right.
you're not gonna get any. But with transfers and other creative thinking, we made it happen. If we're gonna pursue anything out there with alternative banks, you gotta think SGMA. Now, the mention of Owens Valley was classic. You go out there and you mention Owens Valley in the same word politically, you are done. They're gonna see that, and I'd love to see Valley do it. I would love to see Valley Water say that, because the political ramifications of that would be unbelievable. I I don't even know how to describe that. I sit in on the Sigma meetings at Aqua. And one of my biggest fears is that Sigma isn't gonna look at banking. They're gonna just look at what they look at. And they're gonna ignore the fact that water banking was developed to help solve the problem. And if you kill it through Sigma and Sigma rules, you're killing what could save it. And when you go to these meetings, you'll sit there, and I sit there and I listen, and I never hear that brought up. I brought it up off to the side the last time. They better start looking at that. And if we go out there, we better be ready for it, because it's a lot more complicated than us dealing with just Hayward. They will crucify us if they see that we're out there seizing water for the Bay Area. And we have no political pull that's going to be able to beat that.
So again,
That's-
your answer there is also kind of the Sigma risk,
You've gotta look at Sigma.
and then you have the location risk, the south of Delta, and then we have just kind of the broader political risk.
I'm fine with south of Delta. We could overcome that. We've already shown that.
Yeah.
But Sigma becomes a big problem
Yeah.
because we're in no position to overcome Sigma, at least not now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we could be.
So you agree that semi-tropic is
So,
suspect?
so,
No.
Okay, so.
so thank you.
These are noted. So
I don't know.
Director
Director
Akbari, you
Akbari?
Just to answer your question very directly, it's the same. Sigma compliance risks, I think, outweigh all the other risks. I think us participating in water banking has given us a lot of operational flexibility, so I like it conceptually, but the Sigma risks are significant, and so if there's another opportunity, it should definitely be evaluated.
all right.
Okay, so your questions are actually slightly different, right? We were talking about risk
Yeah,
associated with groundwater banking. Your question is, what are we trying to mitigate, right?
right. So
so-
we've liberated the risk.
I will put it in two buckets,
Okay.
right? I agree with the risk, in terms of risk, Sigma, right?
Mhm.
We could buy land that come with water, but because of Sigma, we might not be able to realize that water, right? And there's the management risk of a land so far away, right? What are we trying to mitigate? We have groundwater bank generally to provide us with dry water supplies when, well, when we don't have enough water locally, we can bring water back from semi-tropic, and it has been helping us out, right? That also allow us a little bit more operational flexibility. Based on my understanding, it actually help us operate how we treat water based on our different water sources. So those are what we are trying to mitigate, right? Limit to
By
our
groundwater banking,
operations and augment our dry water supply. Another risk that we're not talking about is the ability to bring water back. We've been very lucky that we have been able to bring water back during dry weather, and our staff has taken down their crystal balls, polished it really well, and tried to bring water back earlier if they think there's going to be that we're not going to get enough water supply. So
Right.
we try to recharge our local water supply. I see that as a risk, the ability of having the availability
Right.
of the bank water.
The
So-
bank's liquidity, no pun
Yes,
intended.
so that is my bucket of risk, but in terms of mitigation, literally it's just to augment our water supply during,
Yeah.
periods of dry. Why can I not find the word?
Right here. Dry hydraulic.
Dry year, thank you.
Okay. Let me move on to the second one related.
Philippe,
And that,
could I hang on one question,
Please.
just clarification? So Sigma, there's two elements of Sigma risk which were noted here. There is no such thing as a groundwater bank or aquifer that does not have a Sigma risk, right? So semi-tropic is by no means unique. It's not exclusive in the world of water banks having a Sigma risk. The other ones don't. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a bank yet that has had an accepted GSP. So I want to clarify, when we're talking about mitigating risk of Sigma, are we talking about basically, is there an interest in just having a second basket? Or is it about groundwater bank Sigma risk is so great, we want to find something that is absolving us of that?
For me, I think a second basket would be great. I think the one I think semi-tropic has worked very well.
Mm.
I would like to see it continue. I don't know if we need a second
Mhm.
basket if we have semi-tropic. I think this is where the state should be focusing, is the operations like the groundwater bank that we are using semi-tropic. But I'm also very aware of how Sigma is playing out. And anything associated with groundwater out in the valley, we have to take a very, very close look at the risk associated with Sigma torpedoing any of our efforts. I'm hoping.
Okay,
that
so
this-
that's water management world,
Yeah.
protecting our resources, and we are, make sure the board's aware, we are very actively engaged in that.
I certainly hope that the state will see that and will become far more progressive with water banking and operations like semi-tropic.
Okay. But to this question, it sounds like supplementing semi-tropic with a second bank
If we need.
to mitigate risk, and also are there any other synergies or benefits?
Because you still have the.
So that
Okay,
actually
I'm
sets us,
getting
it actually sets us up for the next question, because having another groundwater bank from a portfolio argument, you could say you're having a positive correlation to sigma risk. And so that's a question then, in terms of storage modality, what is the interest and appetite for surface water storage as either a second or third bank?
First of all, semi-tropic contract ends in 2034. So it's not a long-term, even if it survives till 2034. And in the interim, semi-tropic is under contract to provide us alternate water supplies if they can't produce. So we're covered to 2034, but that's only 9 years. Water supply, including surface water, is being able to tap into the delta, which is going to become more and more seasonal water supply with sea level rise. We have Del Valle Reservoir, has potential for another 50,000 acre feet of storage, built, plumbed, and paid for. Delta Conveyance, 30 to 40 years out. Sites doesn't make any sense without conveyance, particularly given sea level rise. So we're limited in what our options are, but and was a great plan in the early days of the state water to build a 1 million acre foot reservoir where Los Vaqueros is located. And the record of decision allowed them 100 million, but that would have been a new dam near the transfer station and the removal of LV 1 and 2, which have already been built, and therefore not bailing out the cost to the contra cost of ratepayers, a big political mess. So there are options out there physically, but may not be within your 25-year horizon.
So, okay, so others in terms of the priority, if any, to be given to surface water storage options.
Work with San Francisco.
Director Gunther, Director
I don't
Akbari?
know if there's many other options out there. I mean, certainly Del Valle is an issue, but it's got a lot of hurdles to overcome, which we don't control. And we have very, very little control, but it's an option. I think we should keep it on the table. If we could overcome some of those hurdles, I mean, heck, it's right there. Certainly shouldn't stop looking at it.
Director Akbari?
Sites,
Oh, sorry.
sites, I'm not even opposed to sites if it pencils out. I mean, water is water. And that's why I say keep an open mind now that Los Vasqueros project collapsed, in that will something rise out of the ashes somewhere else?
Yeah. Director Akbari, any comment here?
I don't know that I have a great answer here, other than I'm open to Del Valle, but apart from that, I don't I don't really have any other options.
So I'm just going to go very high level in concept of storage, surface storage, right? I'm actually agnostic between groundwater banking or surface storage. For me, what's important is flexibility and proximity to the district. So I really don't care if it's surface water banking, groundwater banking, which is on your list of bankings by operating our own groundwater basin differently, right? So my preference, I really do not have a preference between the two, as long as it's flexible it's close to our district, that would improve our local water supply reliability, I can go either way.
So it's interesting, we have two buckets of risks that we've been talking about. One is you've expressed by proximity to the district, flexibility, and then the other being kind of regulatory, political implementation risk in terms of partners.
When it comes to surface water storage, San Francisco has 5 to 6 years of storage capacity in the Bay Area to meet their water requirements, their ore supply. They're talking about raising more than doubling the capacity of
Calaveras.
Calaveras. Calaveras and San Antonio Reservoir are upstream. The Hetch Hetchy Reservoir aqueduct runs underneath the Deval Reservoir. So there's a real potential opportunity of joint work. We talked about the Mission San Jose Water Treatment Plant to work in conjunction with the Bay Area Water Supply. That is something that discussions at least should begin at the preliminary level.
Okay, let me move on to the third question, and that is, there's a variety of different local groundwater concepts in these list of alternatives. What attributes would make one seen as more favorable than the other? What things, from your mind, would make it more favorable than the other, just to help us prioritize?
We control it.
Control,
Absolutely.
That we own it.
control, ownership, other factors?
Operational flexibility. And cost.
That was actually the last one I'm going to add, which is control,
Mhm.
ownership, or the ability to be flexible in operating that groundwater, whatever that concept option is,
Mhm.
and cost, right? I guess another minor consideration I would add would be probably water quality.
I would add one more thought.
Yep.
The cost, water is cheap. We have an extraordinary, we are not limited by our financial ability to provide water supply in this area. We have a remarkable funded ratio of 9-to-1 going down to about 6-to-1. We've got the money we can borrow and spend where it comes to long-term reliable ownership of water supplies.
Okay, let me move on to the last question, and that is, when we look at the State Water Project 2050, there's a lot of uncertainties associated with climate change in terms of delivery. To what degree do we prioritize an approach that offsets that uncertainty? How significant of a risk is that to mitigate from your perspective? Director Akbari, you're looking at me there.
Right. I would say huge. I want to get my thoughts together, but
That's
I
a
just-
$1 million question.
I don't necessarily have too much confidence in the State Water Project, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, I mention this all the time. Like the upgrades that we've been talking about to mitigate against some of these risks have been being thrown around longer than I've been alive. So, it doesn't inspire confidence. So I would say we definitely want to find a way to mitigate against that risk. What that looks like, I don't have a better response than that, but that is a high priority.
Yeah. Director Gunther?
$1 million question.
More than that.
And if I could, if I had an answer for that question, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be like sitting at a vacation home in Tahoe that I paid for, cash. I don't want to abandon the State Water Project, based on that uncertainty. It's there. Climate uncertainty is there. But we're going to have to address that. We don't know where climate change is going to do. You hear all these varying ranges, and I've heard the term salton sea and other things, and I don't know. What we do know is that, it doesn't seem to be getting better. Probably say that. And that every time something happens, we blame it on climate change. There's the other issue, which doesn't help the matter. So we better start to be able to harden ourselves from it. Does that mean changing the water resources master plan? Maybe that's how we should be looking at this, is harden ourselves against climate change, because we're going to have a very severe problem here locally. Because we are reliant, and we're very close to the delta, in some places too close with climate change. They're going to be the delta. Yeah. So that may not be an option when your pipes are like under the delta, you better keep them pressurized.
Director Weed, this is really setting it up for what you've been kind of harping on most of this meeting in terms of local control, but your turn.
We have an unlimited water supply in the San Francisco Bay. Dr. Sethi referenced it in his notes to us. We've got water if we need it, and we can afford it.
All right, I guess I'm the last one. So state water project water is 40% of our water supply, right? So for me, it's one of the highest priority to address this uncertainty, right? We can't just say we may or may not get all 40%, maybe we get 10%. That is not a way for us to plan, and that should not be our goal or how we approach serving our customers, right? So to what degree I say it should be our highest priority. I don't have a crystal ball to address what we should do to mitigate this uncertainty, but I would encourage us, and I would prefer we look more towards local storage, develop new local supply as a way to offset. Of course, within reason, right? Affordability was one of the pillars that we have all agreed on should be something we consider in our options. So yeah, high priority, but you still need to pencil it out.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be the question that's going to come back to you, not the next workshop, but then the workshop after that. Because it's a question of insurance. It's a question of how much do you hedge your bets against something that's a significant part of your portfolio having very poor successive year returns. So that's going to be the question for you to actually kind of weigh in on in terms of what does affordability look like relative to risk mitigation.
And that would be an ask next time when you come back. I know you cannot give us a cost, right? This is just way too far out there and way too nebulous. But perhaps there's a way to indicate magnitude of the cost to us in a very high level. So at least we could do some sort of comparative analysis between the different options, right? Because I know for me personally, affordability is very important, right? All these options, when I was looking at the list, I will tell you one thing that popped through my mind of all your 42 options is, geez, how much is this going to cost? How much water do we need? Do we need something this big, right? And how do we get the water back to us, right? And I was very glad to hear from Persephone's presentation that, this is just one bit of the puzzle, and we'll be talking about the whole entire picture later. So I will hold those questions, but I will tell you, give you a heads up that when you bring it back, those will be the questions that I would be asking you to address. Right,
Yes.
including another checkbox about local supply, how close is it to us in terms of reliability? So, yeah, that's an ask. So, thank you.
Ask is heard, and I think that's going to come back to you in terms of, are we going to take an incremental approach? Are we going to take some kind of bigger step investments? That's going to be one of the questions. And that's all going to have to do also for you in terms of how much, in terms with all your financial capacity, how much
Right.
of that do you want to expend on that? So
Okay.
preview coming attractions. Let me turn to the team. Is that the input that you're looking for? Is that sufficient in terms of its clarity? And then I know you want to check with the
I
public
could
if there's.
briefly mention one other strategy. The South Bay Aqueduct contractors all have basically the same water supply needs. We have 1 million acre feet, almost 1 million acre feet we have in storage at Semi-Tropic as a joint group. We should be talking as a group. We're trying to come up with a solution. The South Bay Aqueduct itself is suspect. Built 50 years ago, it's probably at the end of its service life and may need another $1 billion to retrofit it properly. They've done several studies, but the major potential catastrophe is there. So thinking of trying to work with the South Bay Aqueduct contractors as an entity, which as a group would have extraordinary financial capabilities. And Valley Water's taking the lead and already being in extensive discussions with Irvine Ranch as well as some of the other groundwater providers in the deltas, some of which are protected from the sigma because of their geological and hydrogeological situations. Matt Hurley is a good person to talk to.
Welcome, Matt. I wanted to respond to your question, Philippe.
Okay, please.
So part of the
Yes.
reason we asked this question, and maybe this is a little helpful, but you know, Dr. Zoe over here has been doing modeling for us, and he's digging into some of the climate scenarios from the Delta. And we will be evaluating the most like extreme, but still probable scenarios, worst case. But I think so far things look pretty good for the next 25 years. But again, after 2050, we've got that deviation from the center where we really don't know what's going to happen. So the good news is, by all indication right now, we're probably fine with the state for 25 years, but there's a couple things. One is, you know, feeling out where this board and this district feels about the state of climate science. Things are happening a lot faster than we thought. Is the level of sea level rise and impacts on the Delta really understood, or is there potential for a more extreme scenario sooner than 2050 that we want to be thinking is credible? The other is how confident are we that as the sea comes up, that we will build alternative conveyance, or if the Delta does suffer substantial catastrophic damage, that it will be restored to levels of reliability that we're used to, or will we be giving up? Will we backslide? So how much confidence does the district want to have in that uncertainty, the climate uncertainty, as well as our collective capacity to address and respond to it, whatever may come, acknowledging that we don't know what's going to come. So that's really the nature of this question. When we talk about more storage, anything that's reliant on the Delta or the State Water Project, we're putting eggs in that basket still. And so that's what the sensitivity was trying to tease out a little bit. In 2015, this board did ask us to look at and evaluate getting completely off the State Water Project. Director Akbari, you weren't here at the time. And RMC at the time acquired, gobbled up by Woodard and Curran. But in-house still has that knowledge. We did that study and it was frightfully expensive, but it absolves us of a lot of the uncertainty of the future. So that's some of the stuff we're going to be seeing. But in this the need to get from 42 water supply options down to that 15 to 20, we're going to have to start culling things out. So we want to make sure we have enough to put together those portfolios that this board really wants to be evaluating. I mean, we could keep a whole bunch of things that we know won't pass muster, but that won't necessarily be the best place for us to put our effort. So that's what we're trying to tease out here tonight with this. It's been a great discussion. I think we've gotten a lot of really good input, and it's going to help give us a lot of clarity. Stephanie, anything you'd like to add to that?
And I'll just add one more dimension to earlier point you made, Director Weed. Is 25 years too short a time to be thinking about this? And to some degree, yes, because if the next 25 years represent a much greater risk, then are you wanting to rebalance your portfolio long-term? Then the moves we make in our portfolio in the next 25 years need to set us up for those potential changes to shift our assets and allocate those assets differently. Okay, over to you.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, next steps here. Well, actually, I wanted to pause just a little bit to introduce or reintroduce an old face, Ethan Birch, a young old face. Ethan, I think the board's familiar with Ethan. Ethan's recently stepped up his role on this project. He's going to be actually in a sort of deputy PM role. And a big part of that is he's going to be doing a lot of the logistics and liaison work with the interest groups. So I just wanted to introduce and recognize Ethan there. You'll be seeing more of him, and also to hand it off to him to give you an update on the next steps.
So just hold on just 1 second. Do we have any members of the public online? I can't see
Currently
that far.
online, no.
Okay. For our one member of the public in the boardroom, do you have any questions, comments for the presenters?
It's been a great education experience.
Definitely
Thanks for grappling
welcome.
with these things.
And thank you for spending time with us. We always love to talk about our water district. All right, Ethan, go for it.
Mary, can you advance the slide for me, please? Okay, so I just want to briefly go over some of our next steps, some of our outreach touch points, as well as some upcoming things we'll be doing engaging the board. So next slide, please. So we'll be hosting a series of interested party workshops. These are similar to workshops that we held in phase one, but we have rescheduled a series here on conservation, watershed stewardship, community and equity, portfolio development and analysis. Apologies. Preferred portfolio implementation. The first two of these kick off on Monday, February 10th. So the way we went about scheduling these was by sending out a survey to our contact list, which was refined through conversations with the project team and executive staff. And we solicited preferences on timing and meeting method. So we'll be hosting these meetings virtually. That was one of the big things that came out of that. And as such, because these are meetings that are generally focused towards the interested parties to be able to interface directly with our consultants, we will be recording these meetings so that they will be available for viewing after the fact for anyone who is interested. So we can have that space with our consultants and our interested parties. We can take a more observational role and then record the feedback and come back later with it. So that's kind of what's queued up for the external outreach, the interested party workshops upcoming, but we do have some additional board workshops upcoming as well. See if, there we go. So today, February 6th, we are here at this options and strategies workshop, but we anticipate hosting an additional workshop in April, another one in August, and then a third one in October or November, and these will go over portfolio themes and groupings, portfolio evaluation and selection, and draft water resources master plan review, respectively. So that's kind of what's coming up. We have a busy year ahead of us, but we anticipate getting a lot of good work done, and we look forward to engaging with you more in these workshops. That's all I've got.
Click the slide just to make sure. I think we're done.
All right. So
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the board? Last minute questions, comments?
I'll make a comment. Somewhat analogous to the environmental CEQA where you don't look at costs because the environment is priceless. So we haven't seen real cost figures in this numbers. But to give you an example of what we've been willing to pay, we had $100 million for the Los Vaqueros expansion with 9,000 acre feet dedicated storage and giving Contra Costa veto authority over all operational decisions. That's the amount of money we've been willing to spend to date. Cost is not a limitation when we look at your various options, and therefore I encourage you to look for the product, and we'll worry about the cost later.
So I think what I heard you say is when we're talking about option screening and getting down from the 42 to the 15 to 20, that cost should not be that big of a factor in screening because there could be other benefits associated with it.
It's not, it will not kill the deal.
Okay. Understood.
In my mind.
Right. I think the screening process, just, to discuss that a little bit, I think some of the input that we got here today is going to be very helpful for us in kind of determining, and it's going to evolve as we start to characterize the options. We may see things that really put into question viability of some of these options within the context of what this planning effort is supposed to do. We don't know what those are necessarily yet. We have some guesses here and there. But I think those screening elements and those thresholds will be developed as we're doing it. So it's going to be like a very iterative process in how we look at it. So we don't have a cost threshold right now saying any option that's over X amount of dollars per acre foot is out. Like that's not the starting place. So to that, I hope that you're happy about that.
There's,
Okay.
I think I'm looking at least 3 items here in the list that are all associated with Del Val. And I don't know if we want to kind of lump them together or leave them separate. Del Val's a good option. I mean, strange coming out of my mouth, but it's a good option. But it has lots of limitations. It's not going to solve our problem. But it's a nice tool. Can we make some of these happen? We're going to need help. We can't do it alone. But those could almost be brought to one option. I would say Del Val what can we do? And we've got several listed here, which are great. I have my views on making it happen, but you know, that's a different game. That's a different story. Things are going to change, you know, 25 years from now, 30 years from now, we may not be worried about Delta smelt anymore for the environment. We might be worried about keeping the striped bass alive. They ate all the Delta smelt. We don't know what it's going to be. And so all we could do is kind of speculate.
That's what planning is.
And, you know, we got to take a straightforward approach to it and like the idea. Good luck.
Well, Director Gunther, I think that's another process in the screening, which I'm actually glad that you raised, is that we have variations of similar projects within the 42. And I think that's going to be another area for screening is what is the best version of that? And can we get it down? And I think that's going to come maybe more clear. There's going to be more clarity around what's the best version of that particular option as we start to dig in and characterize them a little better. So that's a great example of another way that we can be doing the screening is, you know, do we need 3 Del Vals or can we get it down to 1 that we think is the best version of that?
Another possibility, I don't know if we want to do it, but maybe we should be the big desal plant. No? Then we control it.
Well, I think that's kind of in there.
Yeah,
If it-
but
If our
Yep.
groundwater basin or can handle it, I mean, desalting saltwater is not a fun thing. But you know what? It can be done. They're doing it.
And we're in the it can be done category right now. So yes.
Director Akbari, comments?
Oh, no final comments. Just wanted to thank the team. I know this is a pretty extensive effort, and none of us have a crystal ball, so we're we're kind of dealing with what information we have. But I feel like we've got a lot of good options in front of us. I will say, I mention this every time. I wish we had more public participation because these are topics that are going to impact our ratepayers for decades to come. So I'm thankful for our participant today, and hopefully we can get some more participation over the surveys and interviews that you're going to be doing. So.
Yeah, and I think a note on that, I think that's recognized. And I think, you know, we're at sort of the stage right now in the process where sometimes it's difficult for the public to know where to sort of chime in on. And I think when we start getting into the portfolios and sort of philosophies about how to move forward and evaluation of how we evaluate that and what the public perception is on that, and not just the public as one same thinking entity, but different aspects of the public. And I think that's where hopefully we're going to get more participation, be able to explore that a little bit more, as you all are going to have to make trade-off decisions, right, between these portfolios of understanding, you know, there's probably not one portfolio that's going to be the best from a cost, the best from reliability, the best from public, you know, so that's where I think if we can get that public participation at that point, I think that will be really helpful to all of you and staff as well in helping to make those decisions. So that's what we're aiming for.
I just want to close it up by saying thank you for everybody who put together this list. Some of the options are amazingly creative. I actually didn't think that we could operate our groundwater basin in certain ways. I'm like, oh, so thank you. I know there's a lot of work that was put in putting together all these options, so that's really appreciated. So with that, any last minute presentation asked from the staff? Do you have everything you need from us? Do I see a nodding head? Yes? All right, then
Think-
let's move on. Then I'll
Director
just say
Huang?
thank you to everybody. Yes.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. I think we do have everything we need, but I just did want to say a shout out and a thank you to our consultant team, but also all of our staff. You see several staff here in the room and online who are all touching this project in some way, and in addition with other staff in the district as well. So I just want to say a huge thanks to the staff team and acknowledge all of them and thank them for being here today as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is a really big lift and we really appreciate all the options and the preparation you have done for us. So thank you. All right, with that, should we move on to next item? Do I have a request for a short break or should we just move on?
I can be
Where-
pretty
okay.
quick with just
for it.
the general manager's reports. I just have, well, I have one on the agenda and I also have another sort of late breaking one. It's just a heads up. So the item on the agenda is upcoming Association of California Water Agencies Joint Powers Insurance Authority. That's ACWD. It's one of our acronyms we like. It's an insurance provider for the district. The ACWD is governed by a board of directors made up by members of its individual agencies, and it has an executive committee made up by members of the board of directors. They're having elections coming up soon. There are 4 seats available. And because the executive committee has to be comprised of members of the board, I'm giving the board a heads up. Director Weed, who serves on the board for the district, has indicated an interest in becoming a member of the executive committee. And so we're planning on putting a resolution on the agenda for the February regular board meeting to nominate Director Weed to the executive committee. So it's just a heads up for now, but that's on the agenda for next week.
Thank you. There are 400 directors, but to be on the executive committee, you must be a participant in each of the 4 programs that are offered by the JPIA. About 4 years ago, 5 years ago, ACWD took on all of those 4 categories, so that I can now run. On a separate issue, I understand the BOSCA requires me to be.
That's item 5.2. That's not on the agenda.
Yeah, it's not on the agenda.
Right, and so
Okay.
this is another heads up. It's hot off the press. I was given this at about 3:59 this afternoon. So BOSCA, the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, and the Regional Finance Authority affiliated with BOSCA, they also are governed by members, their representatives from their member agencies. And Director Weed is currently the district's representative on the BOSCA board and the RFA, the Regional Finance Authority board. And Director Weed's term expires on June 30 this year. And so the board's going to need to consider appointment or reappointment of the district's representative on the BOSCA and RFA boards. And so again, we plan to place an item on the agenda for the March board meeting. That's not next week. We'll do this in March. We have a little bit more time. But a heads up that staff plans to put an item on the agenda for the March board meeting for the board to consider if they would like to appoint or reappoint a member of the ACWD board to serve on those boards. So more to come on that.
Thank you. Anything else?
That is all from me.
All right, directors, comments and or agenda item requests? Any requests, comments? Seeing
I
none?
have none.
Okay, then let's move on to closed session. Item 7.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators at Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, Amy Reeve, and Stacy Q. Employee Organization Operating Engineers Local 3. Item 7.2 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators at Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Amy Reeve. Unrepresented employees, management, confidential, professional employees. With that, we will adjourn to which conference room?
Operations conference room.
Operations Conference Room at 5:59.
Recording in progress.
All right, the board is back from closed session at 7:39. So for item 7.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators at Stevenson, Johnson Wunderlich, Amy Reeve, and Stacy Q. Employee Organization Operating Engineers Local 3, and the report back is directions given to agency representatives. For item 7.2 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators at Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Amy Reeve. Unrepresented employees, management, confidential, professional employees. And the report back is direction given to agency representatives. With that, I will call the meeting adjourned at 7:40.
Very good. And just for the record, Director Sethi was not able to make any part of the meeting, including closed session.
Thank you.